to the cloud. Part 2 of week 7, February 21st, 2022. So tomorrow's kind of a weird day. It's a Tuesday, 2022, kind of a weird day. So today we're in the day before the weird day. But it's going to be kind of interesting because this week we have someone who's originally born in Seoul, I believe, right? Or near Seoul, Kyungmee. My son was also born in Seoul. Next week with Kyungmee Lee, who's retiring next week at this time. She's our featured guest, along with 4 others from grad school, who I went to grad school with Okwa. She's a very famous person. So I had 2 scholars within the field of instructional technology, whatever you call it, instructional design technology, learning design technology, whatever, come with us who have Korean roots, which is, I hadn't thought about that before. So that's great. Someone who's relatively early in her career and has done some really thought-provoking work, actually, and someone who's at the later edge, she's going to continue to do work now, Kyungmee Lee. Okwa is so popular in Korea, she's often called by the president to the Blue House, they call it, not the White House. And she has to give her opinions about where educational technology is going. So Kyungmee has really provided thoughtful, as I said, thoughtful pieces. And I've printed a bunch of these out here. And for instance, who opens online education, to whom and for what? And we'll talk to her about who, for whom. And then she offers a piece on rewriting a history of open universities, histories of distance teachers through autoethnography. So she has these meaty pieces, these real thought-provoking, thought-engaging, are not easy to do because she's pushing theory at the same time she's collecting data and getting that research analyzed in a understandable way. And that alone is difficult. But what in addition, she's able to do is she's starting a conversation. In fact, she writes for the conversation. You can go to her pieces in the conversation. And I sent you the links to these that really kind of ramped up during COVID times. And if you look at March 2020, she's writing about a piece of, what are we going to do now during COVID time? Well, here's 14 simple tips during COVID times for better online teaching. What can universities do? They're shifting to online class, but it's not so easy. Universities have invested a lot in this, but what's working and what isn't working? And she has several other pieces of tips and advice and so forth, 5 ways that an online university can succeed or not. So what I'm saying is she's been able to help people at the practical side, or people in the trenches, understand what's going on. And she's able to find topics that people are interested in reading. I think some of these have had tens of thousands of readers. Did any of them get over 100,000 or near 100,000? Yeah, she's shaking her head, yeah. So over 100, I would like to have an article read by over 100,000 people, okay? Well, my free book is about, not an article. I don't have any articles. So she's been able to help people around the world with this extreme need, pervasive need across all educational sectors, all countries. At the same time, she's pushing theorists. She's pushing distance learning educators, say, hey, you've been promising all this stuff for centuries, but it ain't working. There's certain things that you've promised and keep promising and overhyping what's going on, but I'm going to list these things. I'm going to point out, I'm going to review the literature and point out your own literature. And as a young person, this takes a lot of guts, a lot of courage to say, hey, all you guys, you're not succeeding in what you're attempting to do. That's in a nutshell, that's what she's doing. And so top that off, she's interested in open and distance education, online doctoral education, which some of you are a part of here. You might have questions about that. International distance education, some of you are part of that. Inclusive and authentic learning, which you just talked about, we'll talk about next week. And in my Tuesday night class, we'll talk about authentic learning tomorrow night, and anyone's welcome to come. Qualitative research, phenomenological research on ethnography, critical discourse analysis. When she was at Toronto, I think Oh, got critical discourse analysis in her brain over and over. She was supposed to be my student here in Bloomington, but she wanted to go up to this, help the Canadians out. So, okay. And document analysis, text analysis, so forth. So she is co-directing the Center for Technology Enhanced Learning. And that's where we all should be. We should all just, technology enhanced learning is where it's at. You know, for me, it's the intersection of education, psychology, technology, and business. For her, it might be a different, but it's an intersection nonetheless. And her research interests are the various areas I've already mentioned in here. So current projects investigate academic experiences of diverse, non-traditional, and mature students and educational professionals. Scholarship primarily influenced by Foucault, say it for me, Foucauldian? Yeah, discourse on knowledge and power. And so here we have a young and powerful person with us. She'll be a role model to all of you because you too can be making a contribution to the field of open and distance or distributed learning. You too can be working in the field of technology enhanced learning. And I've asked her to present two of her studies, one of which we had in the last week's articles. So when we didn't get, so what happened? We didn't get to any of the article discussions last week because Sanjay was so fascinating. We had Sanjay Mishra from the Commonwealth of Learning that I thought we need to at least hear about one of the articles, and who better than Kyungmee to talk about it. And then when I went to her website, she's studying, so her recent studies on online proctoring, which I have a doc student looking at that. So I said, you know, if you could present on your newest study too, that'd be great. But whatever you want to talk about, Kyungmee, the floor is now yours. I want to welcome Kyungmee in, not coming to us from Lancaster. She is over the ocean. She's in Korea visiting family right now. So let's give her a round of applause and thank her for coming in.
Thank you so much for that, Kurt. Yeah, it has been recorded, right? I need that whenever I feel depressed about myself. I
forgot she's recently promoted to senior lecturer about a year and a half ago or so, right?
Yeah. Well, last summer, actually, half a year.
Half a year ago.
Yes, okay. Still okay. All right. So is it all right to share my screen?
Yeah, which it looks great
right now. Yeah. Great. So thank you so much for invitation and such a generous and nice introduction. It's really good to be here. So there are a lot of things that I can probably share, but let me just focus on two papers that I have asked to talk about. And if any questions beyond this, I'm happy to engage with, as I mentioned. So just to keep everything on time, let me just start it. So as Kurt said, I have done a lot of different things, but the main thing that I've been always interested in is pretty much history. So that's what I can capture here. So when it comes to history, it can be long history of century we can look into, but also history can be just years. So at the moment, we can talk about history of pandemic even. It has been only 2 years, but there are a lot of ruptures and moments that we can look into and changing people's mindsets and perception and practice. And those are really interesting historical moments that we can even look into. So all my paper have this component of history one way or the other, but some of the papers talking about very long history, like the one that I'm talking about. And second paper I will talk about is going to be quite short-term perspective history. So when people talk about history in our field, as you can imagine, it usually has quite a strong thread. So if you ask people to, talk about the history of education technology, there's a couple of things that people will go through. It's usually quite expectable. People may talk about some of the ideas. So when it comes to open universities, some of you may be familiar with the historical development of it, but for now, if we ask questions about open university, open education to those people who are studying about it, they tend to go through the historical origin of open universities. They will start with that open university has been invented this year to open the door of higher education to the underserved people. And then ever since that, they will come up with numbers to show us that how many students they have served. And it sounds all very good and promising and progressive. And we feel like, oh, the world is so much more open, Kurt. And you're right, but it's like slightly more open than previous year. And so that's one way of people talking about history of Open University. And another way of talking about history of Open University is often quite associated with the development of technology, instructional technology. So people tend to talk about when we started the Open University years ago, we have used post and paper, and then we sent textbooks around the world, and then we got the students sent their assignment by post, and we mark it, and it was like all glorious kind of historical moment. And then kind of people start to use phone and later on internet. So they tend to go through the historical development to introduce the history of open universities. So that's all fine. And it's quite progressive and quite positive, and often we feel quite good about it. And this general historical narratives is certainly very helpful and useful, and we really need that. However, what happened at the moment in very current era is like Open University, many of them, not all of them, but many of them in many countries, they faced this huge financial crisis. They have find it difficult to recruit students. And also they could find it very difficult. They have find it very difficult to compete with other universities who start to do online learning and teaching, including Indiana and Lancaster. We've been doing good. And also when we look into society, there's ever-growing and so much more serious educational inequality. Of course, there is more opportunity open, so we can't only criticize that. However, when it comes to people's experience and lives, actually there are so much more dramatic inequality existing in the society. So if you look at this slide, I mean, simply, so you want to talk to this scholar who are doing Open University things for years, and they will tell you about the history, which both quite progressive and quite positive and nice. And then you can't only put your head around to understand if everything has been that good and technology has been developed enough, and then the origin of university, Open University has been remained as it is. And then actually the outcome that we're seeing around, within our neighborhood should be so much more positive than what we are seeing now. And it's quite difficult to see the disconnection between what we're seeing in terms of this crisis and what have been people could talk about the historical development of these things. So that's why I was worried. That's just kind of motivation and problem, if you like, of my study, that I want to figure out actually what have happened and who I have to go to. Is the teachers actually who've been teaching at the Open University. Just briefly, I want to capture some of my theoretical framework of history. I mean, you can come up with different idea of history, and people tend to have quite different perception of what history is. But certainly I hold this very subjective view of history. So for me, history is just stories. So you can have, you can have history of yours, and everyone can develop everyone can write the history of whatsoever that they've been engaged with throughout their life. So histories are just stories that we tell about the history, about the past. And those history and those stories, I'm technically speaking, that should be more objective, because like people tend to talk about the stories based on, let's hope that reliable sources or evidence. However, what happened is that any supposed fact that people kind of collect together to tell the stories, it's quite questionable, because if one person is talking about history of the Open University, that history is partial story because he didn't know or she didn't know what had happened to other people all the time at the same time. At the same time, the way that they're put together to develop the narrative is also constrained by their own, ideology, if you like, or cultural forms or cultural background they feel more comfortable with. So it's like the fact that they collect itself is quite biased, but the way that they put the fact to develop the history or story is also quite biased. So for me, this is the way that I see the fictional truth. History as fictional truth. So that's why I went to talk to people And then what my idea was that if I collect history of this 8 distant teachers from 2 open university, so they have been taught those university for 20 years or longer, that like, and they're all the verge of, I mean, ever since I talked to them, some of them have retired already, seriously. So it was really, for me, that was that they have these stories that they have to tell me. And then if I collect those stories of 8 people and try to make sense of what have happened to them, I thought like I may be able to develop the slightly different stories of Open University, which is not the same as what is commonly told. So that's what I have done. And those 8 distance education educators, teachers, at different moments of their career, they've been very active member of institutional leadership. So they tend to have quite good broad perspective of what Open University around the world have done too. So that was my choice, and it's like purposive sampling, convenient as well as strategy that I have used to talk to these people. And then why I decided to choose do the autoethnographic interview is that, I mean, there are different ways and tips that you can use to interview people, but I really want them to talk about, want them to be talking about their history, but not only about talking about their history, but I want them to, during the interview, talk to me about history, and then have the second part of interview to revisit their history and analyze it with them. Because I find myself as, again, the junior scholar, I think it's too much for them to give me a lot of stories, and then I sit down as a researcher to analyze those stories myself. I felt like that's a little bit of too, I don't know, I thought this but too rude, and I have to respect them more. And I was certain that analyzing they could do with me is going to be so much more powerful or accurate, if you like that term. So that's what I have used this particular methodological approach to, which is called autoethnographic interview, to talk to them. So as you can see, it was long interview, so 2 or 3 hours, and with one interviewee, I mean, we're not supposed to do that. Maybe, I don't know. We kind of went off to the pub and we drank and talked even more hours, which I haven't recorded, but like altogether, it's 6 hours of long history that he told me. And then we analyzed that. We kind of used different theories. We kind of brought different things that we can use. And I have done so 2 things. So if you look at the second bullet point, there are 2 strategies that like I used for this particular research interview method. The first one, I really kind of asked them to talk about their emotions. So they kind of start with the facts, but I was able to kind of push them to think about like and talk to me about how emotional reaction that they have done. So a lot of rich emotion came out. And after that, we kind of tried to kind of put those emotions and stories within the broader context of history of Open University together and try to analyze it together. That's why it took very long, but it was most fruitful kind of interview that I have done with my participant. And that it was inductive coding. So my job as a researcher within that particular project was quite minimal in a way that I just went in, I talked to them, and I really asked them to do pretty much everything when it comes to analysis. I came home and I coded, but my coding was pretty much done already during the interview time. So if you're interested, I'm happy to share more of it, but for now, I think that's good enough to move on. So the findings, certainly, Open University teachers, they have very similar to shared aspects of their story, but quite different from one another. And certainly, none of them are agreeing with the general historical account that we're more used to. So the 3 themes. So first of all, openness. It's like everything is open. Everyone is saying that things are open. And then there's a lot of narrative and discussion and almost a rhetoric of openness that they live their life at the Open University, and then they feel like everyone is saying that things are much more open, but they feel like they have lost a sense of mission. So years ago, they were really trying to open the door to the people, particularly a small number of people like women and blue collar worker and minors, so on. So it's a specific group of students that were working closely in prison. Was one of the things that they have really worked all the stage of Open University in the UK. in Canada, for example. And then those people are kind of not there anymore. And then they seems to work really hard to open things up to a lot of people around the world, but they can't really pinpoint who those people are. So that, as a teacher, as you can see that like how important for us to like see our students and talk to our students, and we just want to have personal relationship, but they haven't had that anymore. But things seems to be so much more open for sure. So they have got a lot of numbers. So they said they heard that one of their course is taken by so and so number of people that they couldn't even imagine. However, they don't really feel the strong sense of mission that they are kind of working with. And second one is like technological innovation. So moving online and long-lasting resistance. As you can imagine, some of these teachers, not all of them, half of them, like let's say, I think I would be safe to say, half of them are really resisting the technology. For example, those teacher who is very interested in, who is like thinking the prisoner, serving prisoner is his lifelong mission. So as soon as like the Open University start to move online, they couldn't really do the prison service anymore because of course that we weren't going to give the internet to prisoners. It's quite problematic, isn't it? So they have to shut it off. And then by the time the university decide to stop entirely the paper-based, study, they don't have it anymore. So every single kind of neighborhood, like Aboriginal kind of community in North side, which don't have any internet, they are automatically excluded in their service. So, that technology innovations, those people who are really caring about those underserved people with technologically, they find it very difficult to accept the movement that the university is having. But on the other hand, probably 4 of them are very like progressive, open, educators, just like us, who believes MOOCs and, the open education resources. And they really want us to, university to embrace the online learning and teaching more early, but because of the resistance of the other party, that they couldn't really do it. So they feel like compared to Indiana University and Lancaster University, they are like kind of slowed down. They haven't progressed enough, fast enough, and frustrated there. So that's quite different kind of emotional emotional reaction around the technological innovation. And as you can imagine, stories are quite different based on where the personality of each individual. And then in all of this, so what happened about the sense of mission is lost in terms of close connect with their students, and technology is developing, but like not fast adapting. It's all kind of complex. Within the complex situation, a lot of these 8 teachers feel quite lonely. At the end of the day, they don't really see, they don't have enough support from their colleagues, those innovative technologists feel like their colleagues are not liking them. And at this moment that the people who are resisting it, they feel like they're not getting support from institutions. So it's quite complex. It's like just to, I need probably more time to unpack it, but that's some of the findings that I got. And the second paper, very briefly, I think this paper will be so much more easier for you to understand because we have lived this history altogether. So COVID-19 pandemic, I don't have to talk about it, emergency online learning. I'm moving on to my second paper, which is just published through the BJET. And what happened is first term, we're all crazy and everyone was focusing on moving lectures online, which was great. And we have done that. And then what happened is toward the final period that we haven't had enough energy to think about even exam. We were just busy to put things. And what happened is first exam at this university that I had my case study on, it's a lot of student cheating happened, and you can imagine. And to solve the problem, and they have adapted this technology to control students' behavior. So if you look at this, and then after adopting some of the technology, it seems like cheating has been decreased. The instance of cheating has been decreased. So it's a quite short period of history, the 1 year. If you look at it, it seems like very, inevitable and successful even, and natural progress of problem and solve the problem using technology. So nothing to really question about. And when it comes to literature about this particular topic of online exam proctoring technology, there are most of the papers are kind of talking mostly about technical aspects of the tool, the pros and cons, like which tool is better to use and so on. There are a lot of discussion about it. and some ethical concerns limitedly discussed, but mostly about data protection and private issues on. So that's what the literature and the situation were. And I was wondering about within this situation that what's going to be long-term pedagogical impact or short-term pedagogy impact, because I couldn't find a lot of study. I'm glad to hear that one of you is doing this study, so it's so much more welcome. But when it comes to this topic, so far, the pedagogical impact on pedagogical side of the technological use hasn't been studied that much. So I was just wondering what had happened in terms of 3 bullet points. As you can see, what happened, how students like identity is formulated within this situation of using some technology to control their behavior, and also how the pedagogical relationship between them and teachers have been shifted because of that technology, and what is the educational outcome. So I was wondering about what have happened within those short period of situations. And especially, I was trying to look into in between. So in between the emergency online learning adoption, and then all those cheating happen, and after those cheating happen, and until the university decide to adopt the technology. So I started looking into the in between period. So this is theoretical thing that I'm not going to go through, but I used a particular lens to look into. So as you know, that just based on theory that you use, actually story that you will tell is dramatically changed. So it's, watch out, it's better to choose the right one for you. But somehow I fell in love with Foucault during my PhD. So I've been using his idea because it really tell me the story that I want to hear particularly. So I'm not going to go this, but if you're interested in what I'm talking about, how I use Foucault and how other people in our field has been using Foucault, not really a lot of people have used, so it still has novelty within the field. However, there are really good studies have done using it. So this is my paper from 2020, so have a look. But for now, I'll just move on to what I have done in this study. So qualitative case study, I look into one institution and I analyze different documents around this online exam, and 14 semi-structured interview with all the academics who went through this history 1 year together, and 12 email interview with students. So student data here, I use partially as a proposal of triangulation to make sure that all those things that academics are saying is in line with students or against students. I was wondering about it. It was quite deductive coding because I have very strong, theoretical framework. So in one sense that because my theoretical framework was too strong, so I just kind of went in, I felt like a little bit guilty because I feel like I'm just really, I have my story that I have already decided before analyzing data. But that's one of the way that we study, we research using theory as well. So what happens, this is finding. So what have happened is when the first online exam happened, a lot of students cheated, and it was possible for them to do it. And then there are a lot of complaints, as you can imagine, from students themselves. Not the teachers were fine, but students were saying that so and so have cheated, and then he got the best score. And then also what had happened is that all this discourse about educational fairness emerged dramatically, and students start to talk about what's fair, what is not fair. And then the conclusion was the kind of dominant conversation back then is that online exam is not fair because some students, unless you cheat, you will never get anything good. And then that's why just most students, what have happened is that there are two groups kind of emerge slowly, and then the cheater group. So a lot of people actually cheated. That's fact. So the cheater group, and then the people who are cheated. So basically, if you decide not to cheat, actually you're cheated in terms of because this grade is not really fairly reflect the achievement. So they using this technology have done, it's great, but what it has done is that it really tried to correct student behavior in terms of cheating. So if you look into this emergency situation, that actually a lot of opportunity rise in a way that we could involve students in very meaningful discussion, especially around evaluation. So, exam, we all know that exam is perhaps not the best way to measure students' achievement. So when this pandemic happened, actually, that was gold opportunity for us to actually push this conversation about what is the best way for us to evaluate students' achievement and think about education fairness indifferently. There are a lot of issues about the technological divide and so on. So students could really involve onto this conversation about fairness, what is fair and not fair in the bigger concept of society. But all those things, in my view and conclusion of our paper, is those opportunity was missed because we only focused on cheaters. And we really engaged with a lot of conversation, very narrowly defined conversation of fairness and what is right within the exam situation, rather than challenging the idea of exam and the online exam. We just quickly take the tool, which let us realize the traditional way of evaluating students' achievement in the same way, but taking care of the problems quite easy way, superficially, I would say. So what have happened is students now, they're all happy after adopting those technology because certainly cheating case has been reduced dramatically. And no one is talking much about because education fairness has been achieved. But even though they have a lot of educational inequality issue among themselves in terms of what kind of education learning condition they have at house and so on, but those conversation has been missed because this simple kind of conversation and the simple technology was given to stop this occasion. So it's quite sad. And then now we reinforce the idea of exam even across the university. So that university, in our view, is going to keep doing it because everyone is happy. But the question to us is whether this is an outcome that we really wanted to. I mean, we don't want that kind of situation from. So that's it. I'm sorry that, Kurt, I think I took probably too long, but yeah, that's two of the studies. And I have this event going on probably in 2 weeks. I was just doing a bit selfish promotion, but if you're interested in how I fell in love with Foucault, this is when I'm going to talk about it. My students asked me to talk, so I'm going to do that. If you want to come, well, then welcome to come. Thank you.
Let me ask some clarifying questions. You're going to send me the slides so they can get that link, right? Or
yeah, sure.
You can also post the link in the chat for them. Okay. Just a comment first is the first study, when you talk about history, for students who take a class like this, often history is 1 week, 1 semester. We're 2022 now. If I include articles from 2021, that's considered old oftentimes, So just it's hard keeping a class like this up to date. My point is, but you cannot, I guess, point out what the 2 open universities that you studied were. I think that's for privacy issues, right?
No, it's okay. It has been mentioned in the paper. I think one is in Korea, one is in Canada.
Okay, so the national.
Yeah, Korean National Open University and Athabasca University.
KNOU and Athabasca. Okay. So, and you mentioned they would be interviewed for 2 hours, and yet they would last 5 to 6 hours because you go to the pub afterwards. You can do that in Korea and Canada. You might not be able to do that in other countries. But you also mentioned taking no prisoners, that the original mission was to service the incarcerated people, but they can't now because they don't allow the internet in prisons. That's true in the U.S. too, oftentimes. Helping people who are incarcerated get, with new educational possibilities is often quite limited. Some places it's different than others, of course, but that's an interesting comment that's a parallel here. The second paper you'll send us a copy of so I can share that. Can you mention a couple tools that do proctoring? Tegrity, I think, is a tool for proctoring. What are some of the tools out there?
Oh, that's a good question that I can't really remember any of the names for now, but that paper that you can share with your students, I think first I have the literature review section have like 20 tools listed there.
Oh, you have them. Oh, okay.
So I'll let you read it.
Okay, good.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds good. What and who, if any, did you interview people for that second paper? And how many interviews did you do?
I had 14 interviews with faculty members and 12 interviews with students by email.
Any of the cheaters did you interview?
Yeah, students were actually admitting that they have done, not all. Yeah, and then they admit that the tools were, so it's not only one simple tool that that university has used, but the tool plus Zoom and other strategies that like the camera, they have to show their hands and so on. You know, it's a quite complicated, very kind of complex mechanism of use of technology has been developed as a practice to solve that problem. So students find that quite useful.
The Foucault paper was in what journal?
It's that journal, like Studies in Technology Enhanced Learning, the open access journal we have just launched years ago. Kurt, that
You can
remember
send
your.
so your own. So you want to mention that your journal that you've launched last year or 2 years ago. You want to mention that for everyone?
Yeah. So we have launched because the center that I am co-directing, we have a lot of PhD students who really need the opportunity to engage with scholarly conversation, but at the kind of low level of interest, let's put it like that way. So mainly we launched the open access journal, peer-reviewed journal, and for a sake of helping our own PhD students to have the opportunity to publish with us, and academics who want to publish paper which is in very accessible manner, the student can understand what's all going on. So that was a motivation for me to add another open access journal because there's a lot already in the field. I mean, I couldn't really justify why we need another journal, but because of those two motivation and reasons, we launched another journal called Studies in Technology Enhanced Learning. And then the paper that I wrote, it was one of the paper I published in the first issue of the journal. And then it's all about how to explain Foucault in accessible way to my doctoral students. So it's quite a personal writing that you can read from it too. Is it all right? Am I
maybe Christian okay? can go to the Journal of Technology Enhanced Learning Studies. Say that again. Studies in Technology Enhanced Learning. So Christian can find a link to that one as well.
Yeah, the Foucault paper I've listed the link to, and then also the openness and innovation in open higher education I just got put in there.
And also the journal main link, Christian.
The main link, okay.
Yeah, that would be good. So I have, as you all, I sent you all my questions that I have. I have 12 of them. Some are deep. Well, first few are a lot deeper than the others. Maybe what I should do is ask one or two of these and then open up, and I'll come back to some more of mine. So I'll start with the first one. I don't even remember what the first one was, but we'll see what. So a few years ago, one of your papers said there are 3 dominant discourses in distance education. Distance ed is open. Distance learners are self-regulated adults. Online technologies lead to can lead to some serious pedagogical change and so forth. Can you explain what this means and how this has changed and what you found?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar with what I've discussed during my presentation of the first paper.
Right.
So if you look at so I have done the systematic literature review of all the literature on open distance education. Back then it was 2017 paper, I think. So during my PhD, actually, I have that studied literature review, and I tried to understand that what are these. So that particular paper is about that. I read a lot of paper and tried to understand what are common assumptions of the authors across those papers. So some of those authors are expressly saying something or not saying something, but no matter what, there are some, there are some norms, the kind of normal ideas of what this open university or open education is about and how it has been constructed. So I tried to look into, that's how I use critical discourse analysis using Foucauldian idea of discourse. So I tried to identify some of the discourse really dominant, which means that a lot of authors are just assuming that's just how it is. So there was 3 kind of main discourse going on that I was able to identify. The first one is apparently the Open University is for openness. So, I mean, it's like whole idea of rhetorical claim about how things are open. That's first thing that a lot of authors have assumed. It's not that a lot of people believe that things are totally open at the moment, but they believe is that what with distance education is about opening the door of education to the people. And if we do distance education better, that means that education system will be so much more open. So that's one of the assumptions that many authors have hold. And the second assumption is that students, that we're dealing with all those students. So the kind of, if you know the andragogical assumption, which has been criticized a lot, but that's some of the things that a lot of distance educators, without having really challenging it, kind of assume that adults are going to be somehow miraculously self-regulated, which is quite odd because a lot of them were actually studying about dropout rate and the factors influencing dropout. So I kind of couldn't really understand how those two discourses side by going together. But anyway, there are a lot of kind of background discussion going on that adults are different from students. So how we distance education should do is to support the adult in the particular way, and then they are partially more self-regulated according to their motivation and professional situation. And third one is that there's huge assumption about the online is so much more open, and it leads a better pedagogical practice. As you can imagine, Web 0.4 and Web 2.0, which is very old idea for now. We're talking of 4.0 now, but it was very huge there. So internet communication is open communication. It has been, it's like really underlying assumption that a lot of authors are trying to say that now we have open, we have moved on online. So those are three things. And I have to say that a lot of those challenges are still existing within the field. However, it has been, fortunately, because of pandemic, a lot of those things are challenged because actually we kind of observe ourselves. We witness this situation that actually those assumptions are not realized in our daily practice, which is a bit sad, but yeah. So now if you just say those things openly, a lot of people can say and come up with the counter evidence and saying it's not probably 100% truth. But even now, if you pick up any, I guarantee any kind of any paper, and if you try to look into what this author really believed inside his head, actually those three assumptions are still quite strong there. So
I'll stop you here. The 2020 article talks about who opens open education to whom and for what, and it talks about the mission is to be for disadvantaged learners, but it hasn't met that mission. Can you recap just briefly some of the history of that, and if you think things will change?
Okay, thanks, Kurt. You're asking this big question and asked me to be brief. I'll try. All right, so that paper, so what I've tried to do is that because this 2017 paper and was really telling me that there are a lot of assumptions. So what I've done in that paper, for that paper, I really wanted to find some evidence in the literature. So, I read those papers again, and I really tried to find empirical evidence that authors are, depending on when they have those kind of assumptions. And unfortunately, the paper is all about that empirical evidence is not there. So one of the things I use is imagined community. So that's really, so a lot of people are arguing that we are serving, the Open University is serving, or distance education is serving the underserved, or disadvantaged, that's very clear. But who they're really talking about, and then just a couple paper only have actual people that they describe and they really serve. A lot of people, it's just assumed that some random people in Africa is getting benefit out of it. So it's imagined community. So that's one of the points that I made in the paper, that we know who serve it, universities are serving it, but we don't really know who we are really serving because we haven't studied. We need more study with the empirical evidence to show us who we're kind of interacting with.
I'll stop you there. I'll mention that your friend Samnadu has shown up here, the editor of Distance Education. The Jamboard for question asking, to ask Kyungmee questions. I just posted the link there that, Christian, do we have any questions on the Jamboard yet? For Kyungmee?
Yes, we have
We do.
two.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I will let anyone who wants to, I've got 10 more questions, but I'm going to stop for now and let someone else take over. So who would like to either ask their question from the Jamboard? You don't have to, you can ask just anything you want.
I don't mind jumping in. Professor Lee, it was really nice to read through your article last week. I really enjoyed the lens of looking at the history of the open universities through the actual instructors. I was curious as to whether you had considered using the ethnographic interview method to interview more distance teachers in the global South. There are several open universities like in India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, other places throughout the global South. Have you ever considered using the same method you had used in that article with more open universities?
Oh, thank you. It's a Halimit, am I?
Halima, the T is silent.
Halima.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for the question and comment. Obviously, yes. One of the things that I've really tried to do in any of my paper is have quite extensive description of the methodology I have used. So if you go back to that paper, actually you can find a good kind of citation that you have to go for to understand the methodology better. And I actually wrote quite a bit of paragraphs of how I've done it, why I have done it. So why I'm saying this is that certainly it's interesting. I'll be happy to do that. There's so many things I want to do, as you can imagine, but I have my daughter and things like that. So my life is just going on too quick. So yeah, it's a really good idea. I'll be really happy to try it out. But I think for me, my mission or my role that I see is to do something. And if I find something useful, I want to teach my doctoral students, I want to share it with people. And then someone who's there, who is interested in the topic, they can do it. I mean, it doesn't have to be always me doing it all. So yeah, it's a great idea. And it would be really good to hear different side of history and their own histories, which should be definitely different from Western things. I would love to do it one day, but if someone else can do using this, getting the benefits out of the the methodological tool that I have, developed, that will be even better. So thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your feedback.
So you should probably mention Lancaster and what you have in terms of students, because it's a different population, maybe somewhat, it's all online students, right? And are they masters and PhD both?
I teach the program called a PhD on e-research and technology enhanced learning. We have more than 400 PhD students around the world. Everyone is doing it fully online and part-time. And as you can imagine, it's true that many of my PhD students that I currently supervise, I have quite a good number of students, are using methodology that I am interested in. So many of my students doing Foucauldian critical discourse analysis and autography is certainly one of the popular one among my own supervisees. So I'm very lucky in a way that the way that I do my the situation in which that my pedagogical practice is situated in, it's just perfect for me to develop the future researcher and share these things with them. A lot of people appreciate some of the critical idea that I have. It's really nice to share that. So yeah, so that's my teaching context.
How many advisees are currently dissertating of yours?
Sorry?
How many advisees do you have dissertating?
Oh, no, that's okay. I don't know. I have lost track of it, but I think I have more than 20 for sure that I'm supervising. Oh, doctoral students. They're lovely people. I like them so much, but there are just too many.
Yeah, I understand. Who wants to jump in here? Go ahead, Charity. I see you trying to get in. You can unmute. No, it's still muted. There you go.
There you go. So and now I just completely lost what question I was going to ask. You might need to give me a minute. I've got to
Yeah,
get it back
sure.
in my brain.
Sure, so who want something from the Jamboard then? Go ahead. Christian, why don't you post something from the Jamboard?
How did you first get into the field of open education? Was that your first career choice?
And whose question was that?
That is a good question.
That was me.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nelson. Okay, Nelson's question. Go ahead, Kyungmee.
I'm not really sure whether I totally got the question. Either Christine or Nelson, can you repeat your question for me, please?
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was your first choice to work with open education, or did you have a different path when you first started your PhD?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Like to personal history. Yeah, I've been Kurt knows me a lot. So I used to work for Samsung. So when I started my PhD, I really wanted to do the I was one of those quite problem solver education technology scholar as a doctoral scholar. That like open education, online education is amazing. I can't really understand why people are not engaged with it a lot. And I have to figure out why. So I wanted to do factor analysis. I want to address all the factors that negatively impact upon people's decision of not using online learning and not doing online learning properly. So I went in and so yeah, I started with still other learners that I interested in. I was interested in more teachers. So why teachers aren't using technology, that was my topic at the beginning of my PhD. And then I engaged with the teachers. I visited different schools in Toronto and I tried to do it. But like theoretically, I was developed as Foucauldian, and then somehow at certain point of my doctoral study, I kind of realized that, wait a second, am I listening to them actually? Because what they're saying in terms of why they're not using make total sense. And if you believe that it's not helping you, you shouldn't use it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and saying that online learning is the best way, no matter what you are doing. So that shifted me a little bit and I got shaked. And that's why I was wondering about this. So that's how I got into and just trying to identify some of the dominant discourses. And after that, I went to, okay, so where I can see how discourses are developed. The best place for me to go is Open University because that's the history, you know, and that's the sites that like rich site that I can. So that's how I developed my dissertation project as the historical review of the discourses and why things have been said.
Oh, she's frozen here for a second. I'll assume that she's going to come back in. Kyungmee, you've frozen here. Oh. Oh, Kyungmee, you've frozen on the screen. You're probably going to have to go in and come back in. I'm not sure. I can just barely hear you. Well, the underground cables in the ocean, something's going on there from in the Pacific. Must be a Russian tanker going over. Okay, we'll have her come back in a second. So she did apply to IU and came close to being an IU student. She went off to Toronto. I think it was a funding or they promised her she could finish quicker than IU did. Because she did finish very quick with her PhD at Toronto, which is a very good place. So again, I'll assume she'll be back here in a second. I've sent you all her articles from the conversation, and there's several other articles I've accessed today, more research-related articles. So she's done a lot in a short amount of time. Some is, in fact, very impressed with her too, and has her as one of the review on the board for the distance education, his main journal. So she's one of the up and coming people within the field. Wouldn't you agree with me, Sam?
Yeah, Kurt. Thanks, mate. Can I just make a couple of comments at this point?
Yeah.
You know, I've known Kyungmee from a very long time when she was a doctoral student doing her literature review. I think she wrote to me, and I have offered some advice to her. But I posted a question on the Jamboard, Kurt. Do you want me to?
Kyungmee's back, so go ahead and ask her.
I'm sorry. So I heard your question half through. Can you?
So go ahead, Sam. Go ahead and.
Oh, is it my turn? Thanks. Hi, Kyungmee. I hope you remember me. You and I talked.
Oh, come on, yeah.
A long time ago when you were a graduate student in the University of Toronto, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I too wanted to go to OISE for my PhD, but I ended up at Concordia University, and we used to argue which one was the better. And I still believe Concordia's EdTech program is better than OISE's program.
Well, I wouldn't say anything, but.
Yeah. I think I also got accepted at Florida State. I still did well by going to Montreal. But let me get to the heart of the matter. It's a fascinating opportunity that Kurt, Professor Bonk is facilitating here to speak with the researchers of the future, and you are the researchers of the future. I'm too old now, you know. I'm going to pass the baton on to people like Kyungmee. The challenge that I see a lot as an editor of a journal, a premier journal in the field, is every day I open my inbox and there's 3 or 4 articles from people all around the world. And 80 to 85% of them never go beyond a quick read. I look at the abstract and reject it, which is not always the case. I don't want to accept that, but that is almost always the case. The challenge is to get people to investigate what is worth investigating. So that's the premise of my question. What is worth investigating? So much of effort that is placed by researchers on things that you would wonder why, you know, and then, you know, somebody would have spent 6 to 8 months to 18 months writing it up, researching it, and then at the end of it being rejected within a few minutes. It bothers me a lot. And I'm sure Professor Bonk would support me on that. I mean, he would be reading a lot more than I do from graduate students, and people would have spent so much time putting things in front of editors and professors and then be rejected. So this is a big challenge that I want to bring to the front here. How do you, as a professor now, you know, deal with this situation with your advisees, with your students, graduate students or otherwise, on trying to get people to, I mean, you don't want to force people into thinking certain ways. You don't want everybody to think the way you do, but what you want to do is to direct people towards investigating something that is going to contribute to the knowledge base in a meaningful, substantial way, as opposed to spending, I mean, just to top off that point, you know, I see a lot of people doing fancy statistical analysis with, you know, all kinds of methods, you know, from regression analysis to equations modeling, you know, and those sorts of things, and the factor analysis and all those sorts of things. And then you find, well, what was the point of all that fancy footwork when the core of your argument is baseless and doesn't really make any sense, and why bother with it? So that's the point I wanted to put to you. And for the benefit of our colleagues here, I'd love your reflections on that.
Kyungmee, before you answer him, can I ask a part 2 to that? So he's concerned with how you're dealing with your students. So I'll ask part B, how you screen your own questions. Do you talk to others before you investigate? So I'll let you answer Sam's first and then mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question and a serious issue, honestly speaking, because I mean, my department is dealing with PhD students, and you know how frustrated PhD students in terms of publication, it's just bizarre because academia, they want to get the academic job after graduation, and the number of publications is so important. So from day one, they're stressed about like when I'm going to publish. It's like, yeah, so it's really, I mean, it's not, yeah, I appreciate your difficulty some as an editor, but for the junior scholar, that's really, really issue, almost life-threatening issue, what's all PhDs for if you don't publish. So that's really sad. So usually my advice for my students is do research something really meaningful for you. So at the end of the day, you're not wasting the time. So the reason that I kind of push autoanophy to my students is that like start with your problem that you deeply really bothers you. So you're going to spend good like 6 months from now on to try one small project with me. So we have different modules. Each module is 6 months that everyone has to do empirical study, and I teach first module. And I just tell his students that it's all good that you're going to publish or not. I mean, it's important matter. However, why don't you just study not the one that everyone is studying? Or, I mean, finding the gaps in the literature is important. We're going to do that. However, what is really bothering you about education and technology? What is your experiences so far? Are you all happy? So tell me of something about, tell us as a community, like we have 30 students in the module, and tell us about the issues that you are really dealing with in your daily life. So, and then students brought all sorts of issues really important for them. So at the end of the day, that they spent 6 months, explore that experiences and try to identify underneath reason for that, that feeling and how it can be improved and so on. They often produce so much more richer paper than just collecting, doing survey with 30 students in their classroom. At the same time, a lot of people are a lot of students, at least, they say that the experience is so much more transformative in a way that helps for them. So some of them experience kind of a little bit of liberation, a lot of pressures that they now understand the reason why that's not their problem. It's not that they're not good. It's just how society is constructing us to be pressured about certain things, and being aware of those things is certainly very liberating. And then they write about it. So the advice for my doctoral students, I will always tell them that, okay, choose a topic that is so important for you that although you wouldn't only publish anything, that at least you feel like you haven't wasted your time of spending it. And that's first thing. And second thing is tell something that no one tells, like, so to find the gap, not necessarily advancing knowledge a little bit is important. However, competition is too high. So while you're advancing this much, everyone has already advanced it this much. So, that game of finding the gap in literature is really difficult. So let's say that let's just try to find out what other people are not saying, assumed. So that's my scholarship myself. It's like what people are all assume, no one talk about something that you can be critical about, that your voice is new and different from others. So that's first thing. That's the things that I often tell my students and to myself. So because part A and part B can't be, that's totally linked, because I live my life just like my students. So I'm one of them, I feel still. So yeah, so if that's okay, that's going to be answer to both part 1 and 2.
Well, like a community, let's say Weight Watchers, where you join and you come and you meet, you tell your story, and you all admit to your various stories, or you're trying to, you have whatever, you have a certain illness, and you're all coming together to meet, you might be a cancer victim or something like that. So you're creating this, and they're all giving you feedback on yours, right, during this module for 6 months. And so you're telling them to be passionate about their topic, to care about their topic. If they're not passionate or care about the topic, it's all going to be irrelevant in the end run. There won't be any follow through to get it done. So with the passion comes a lot of persistence, right? That you need to get to that final stage, because it's not easy publishing. It never is. So yeah, I agree with you there. Sam, you gonna comment on that?
I just to expand on the points that Kyungmee has mentioned. I think so much the literature review plays such an important part in this, isn't it? And I find I receive articles lately. They're all about COVID, and so, and they all want to say, oh, nursing students' experiences of online education, or how is online education, for example, affecting the motivation of students, or how is it demotivating or overloading staff, for example. Now, you see, these are issues that have been dealt with, workload, motivation, self-regulation. All of this is in the literature. And what I find frustrating is that senior professors, haven't actually read the literature, and they've gone on and done some research on it, and then I feel sorry that somebody would have actually done something like that. And I can give you so many examples of it. And spend 6 to 8 months, or as I said, more than 8 months doing something, and then I said, this is useless. And if somebody that to me, I'd be heartbroken, isn't it? I'd be very angry. So what I find is that something is not right in the way we educate our researchers who are here in this group, master's students, PhD students, about how to go about the process that you are talking about, Kyungmee. It's not just about passion is important. Passion alone is not going to cut it. You've got to know where the passion comes from. It's not just interesting. It's an understanding of what others have done, what the literature has said, what the field has said, so that you are able, I think you use the word problem, identify the gap, identify the problem. Don't start anything unless you've identified a significant problem. The problem could be for you or the community or the field. And unless you can sell the problem, then why investigate? So this is a challenge, isn't it?
So others, questions for Kyungmee? We only have a couple more. Yeah, Charity.
I remember it now. Actually, I was very interested in your the point you brought up earlier about the proctoring software. In my last job, I actually was certified as a Pearson VUE proctor for a few things. Our school just needed some help with proctors. And even though we did in-person proctoring, I ended up reading their handbook for the, the virtual proctoring they do. I don't remember the software they used, but I remember it was very thorough. I mean, each student would actually have their own personal proctor, like live with them the whole time, in addition to the software. I remember thinking, that if somebody really wanted to, despite everything, they could still cheat. So as somebody who's done research on the software and who works with online, teaching, do you think that maybe we'll just see less testing like that in general, since it will just become harder and harder, to keep people from cheating, especially as technology itself advances? You have Google Glasses and, everything else. So what do you think about the future of standard exams that we normally use in person?
I think she asked her daughter for the answer.
No, I'm sorry. No, I think my mom is doing something that she's almost like breaking the table. I'm so loud. Sorry. So I tried to ask her to stop, but she couldn't hear me because she's so noisy by herself. All right. So really good question. So I don't know. I think, yeah, you're right. Students are smart enough. So I don't know who's going to go faster. It's like technology goes faster, or their brain and their statistic to kind of overcome the technological affordance goes fast. I mean, that's interesting thing that we have to observe. For now, a list that for the past one semester, a list that when it was considered successful, what it has happened with the tool. However, that's why, I mean, the entire paper is really arguing for more fundamental questions. I'm not interested in the tools per se in terms of developing better tools to control. I think the online exam should be challenged. The idea that we just evaluate students' achievement by like the doing exam in online setting. I mean, Som is so right that we have been writing about it years, like all these open universities have been thinking about different ways in which we can do better evaluation of student achievements, and then that no one has care about it during this pandemic. They just want to use the tool to stop student cheating with the same problematic and very teacher-centered knowledge transmitting paradigm of education, which, you know, we like here, we have been working so hard for the past 30, 40 years to develop the constructivism, and we've been arguing for a better way of educating our kids. And then now it's like all about like which tool is better. No, it's not about tool. The exam should go. We should only, you know, it's just, and then we just try to, and then what bothers me a lot is we just have developed this subjectivity of students as a cheater. Like we give them the situation that they can cheat, manipulate, and then we make them as prisoners that you're cheating, and try to associate them with this, you know, malfunctioning educational dishonesty. I mean, whose fault is this? I mean, for me, that's really educators' fault, universities' fault. The university should rethink and recreate the environment that students can develop their potential, and you know, they have to be able to, for students to be able to show their achievement in more creative way, rather than putting them and saying that you shouldn't cheat. I mean, of course, the student will cheat if they can, if that's the only way for them to get the good score, why not? So yeah, that's
People
about
are
the
people.
paper. Sorry,
Well,
Charity.
it goes back to Sam's issue. We've known for a long time intrinsic motivation. We know that creativity-based environments or innovative environments will overcome inertia. I mean, the students will be more actively engaged if we set the right ecological environment. We have a learning environment that's engaging, that's interactive, that's collaborative, that's allowing choice, that's allowing meaningful learning and relevance, and all that, and with feedback. There are certain principles that apply across, you know, educational sectors that, you know, we can give up those silly exam-based kinds of things. We don't need all that software. We want to hold people accountable for learning this discrete knowledge, and not our goals should be higher than that. The goals should be higher than the discrete knowledge elements, and it should be the higher order thinking competencies, you know, the problem finding skills that they need. And so if we did that, if we have an environment built around innovation, problem finding, and decision making, and all, we won't suffer from these ills that education has suffered from for far too long. Do we have anyone else before she goes that wants to jump in here and ask a question? Usually Tilly has a question. I've seen a couple of people put his camera on, so he might have a question. Yeah, he's shaking his head. Yeah. Go ahead, Ga.
I don't know if I'm noisy or not. I have another learner here doing online education at this hour, so who's 13, by the way. So my question is mainly on the cheating part. Is I think I agree with you that is a problem that the educators created in the first place. So what would you suggest us to read a little bit more on the creative ways to assess or to demonstrate the achievement, so that we don't have to put our learners in that situation in the first place?
Thank you. Thank you, Go. Is that right? Is it good? Okay, so good. Yeah, great question. So, I mean, on the other side of it is that there's no experts. I don't believe that there is a expert and an expert who can give the solution to them. So what I really felt sad about this pandemic situation is the opportunity raised for us to be able to have conversation with those instructors, because it's true that all the creative way that we do in education department wouldn't really work for them, because, you know, they are chemistry, for example, lecture 101, they have 200 students or up to 600 students sitting in, and then all this program-based learning that we do, and then we evaluate our students in very democratic way because we have 30 students. So anything that I have expertise and experiences, I know that they will say, come on, like, you know, what are we gonna do? So it's not that I have any creative way of suggesting anything. It could have been easier if that's work, but it doesn't. So my view is that us has this specialties, It's not our job to develop any solution for them, but we engage with them to, critically to ask questions. So when this pandemic happened, if it happens again, I hope not, but like it happens again, what we have to really do is that we grab the opportunity to talk to this instructor and see their situation, because the solution should be there. They may know by themselves the better way of dealing with the solution, but they just haven't thought about even challenging exam. So doing exam, it's just certain things fixed in their head because that's how they've been. So they never really had it in their head. They have any thoughts of not doing exam. So if we got the conversation with them when they are struggling with cheating issues, actually it could be really nice for us to be able to talk to them and with them develop a solution works for their class. And then that could be so much better than letting them figure out among themselves. And then only thing that they could do is use technology to do exactly the same thing they have done for like decades or centuries. So sorry that I not really answer your question, but I really have to say that it's really context dependent and it's really specific. And we are not, that experts to be able to find anything for them.
I'll add that Sam used to be in Fiji, but he's now in Australia, and his colleagues in Australia, Ron Oliver at Edith Cowan University, Jan Harrington, and then Tom Reeves here in the United States at Georgia, have put a book together. Version 1 was 20 years ago already. I found a link to it. You can buy it, or I found a link you can get it free and download it. So it's on Authentic Online Learning. You might want to. I got a signed copy, but one of my students borrowed it and never gave it back. So I'm trying to get I think I got 2 copies. One, the signed one, I never got back. But I highly recommend anything that Jan Harrington has written about. She had a website devoted to authentic learning. She's recently retired too. But anything she's written, anything that Ron Oliver's written, and they're very prolific, and Tom Reeves is as well. And they're all colleagues are all very smart people, so I would start there. They have business examples in that book too. Sam knows them. You want to say something, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. This is the point. Kyungmee is spot on in this one. I did some work on proctoring myself. There's a paper that we published in Open Praxis about that. Charity. The point about these tools are that if you have a live proctor, it costs money. Now, if a university has got 20,000, 30,000 students, can you imagine the amount of money that will have to be allocated? So rare, there are very few universities that can afford these live proctoring systems, or even not the other ones, and they can't. They are not foolproof. They're not bulletproof. People want to cheat. So the point that Kyungmee is making is really the essential point. Why are you designing assessment that will allow people or enable people to cheat? Because you see, I think, this is not an indictment on human beings. If I can find a shortcut, an easier way out of something, I will. Most of us will, right? Why bother? If I can get away with it, I'll get away with it. So don't make it easy for me to cheat. But if you design assessment in such a way that I cannot cheat, then that's what I call is part of teaching. This is where the point about teaching comes in, but I'm not naive enough to understand that if you design those kinds of assessments, then it means more work for the teacher and more work for the markers as well, because things have to be read. But this is where the creative part of teaching design comes in. This is why design is so important. So if you design assessment in such a way that you don't overload yourself, and don't spend nights and weekends trying to mark these things, you got to manage how that's going to happen. There's all sorts of strategies that you include: peer marking, peer grading. So this is where teaching comes in. And so people are saying that, we are jumping onto another point here. The point is about what is the role of teaching design in the facilitation of learning, isn't it? And that's the space that we're in right now.
I have 2 questions off the Jamboard. Actually, one question, I'm going to ask one more off of my list. Off the Jamboard, someone's asking why you chose Athabasca and Korea National Open U, was it a convenience sample? Did you just like going to Canada or going to Korea? And is there differences between those two entities? And I will point out that Korea National Open U has kind of shrunk a little bit in size over the last decade or two as other universities, these cyber universities, have sprung up in Korea. And they have a chapter in my MOOCs and Open in the Global South book. They have the opening kind of, or the second chapter. So it's a fascinating place. They mean really well, but they've lost, and so is Athabasca, I think, lost enrollments. So both places have. You want to talk a little bit about that and why you chose them?
Yeah.
And whose
Okay,
question
so
was that,
like,
by the way? Was that Kim's
yeah,
question?
yeah,
Oh, that was Bell's question. Okay.
Well, I think for me, I love convenience sampling. It's for two reasons, because anything accessible to researcher, I think researchers should go for it. It's not because it's not convenient in terms of physical sense, but also it's convenient in a way that the cultural understanding you have already established, that's all really needed. So of course I could have choose the Open University in the UK. Back then I didn't really do anything with UK. And I could learn all about it, but without knowing UK university system or even school system altogether, it's really difficult to understand and get the essence out of UK university is difficult. So for me, I was very familiar with Korean university because I was there and I was grown up there. At the same time, Canadian university, I was doing PhD, so I was able to, the cultural understanding of those two countries, I have already had it. So for me, that's convenient / proposed sampling of the site that I know about better. Of course, there are better universities. So when you decide to, you have to justify your choice of cases. They're often the case that there's obvious case that you have to go for, because otherwise people wouldn't have, like, you can't be just, that's convenient, so I'm going to do that. If they're although the other one is better. So except for those obvious cases, I think everyone should just go for the places they feel they know the more. So that's what I chose. And then the difference between two universities is like a massive list. I mean, it's like totally, it's except for the idea of what is about open and what the original mission of the sense of the openness that they really start with. Other than that, everything is different. How they developed a course system, what kind of student they're serving, and what kind of instructional design mode that they have used, just like A to Z. I think that it's just so different. So two different universities, totally. So it's difficult for you to find the shared aspect of two. That's why from researchers' perspective, it's good, because if there are just so many things that's shared, you have to record it all and it's just too much finding you have. But for me, two dramatically different sites have 3 or 4 really core themes that they share. It's safe for me to argue that that's what it is, shared history of open universities. So it's really important for you to find. And then, of course, somebody else can do their research on the differences between two. So in terms of second question that you ask, I mean, I'm not going to go through all the differences, but it's just massive. And then based on what you're interested in, you can easily find differences between institutions that you kind of cross-culturally analyze.
So the last question here, you've written these 3 articles in the conversation, maybe more than that. So I want to point out, this is free. The conversation is free. It's also out of Australia, where Sam is. In Canada, they have the Evolution with 3 L's in it. With the UK, they have the Guardian. In the US, we have the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Inside Higher Ed. The conversation is very good. The Evolution, I helped with early articles. It's pretty good. But the conversation, so when you're an academic, you not only publish research, but you also put thought pieces out, oftentimes op-ed pieces in the Wall Street Journal. So the one of these had over 100. How many? What was the record you had, Kyungmee? It was over 100,000 readers.
Yeah, like more than. Yeah, it's a lot. It's more than that. 200,000 readers. That like last time I checked, it was 200. But I don't know. That was like a year ago. But people are still reading it.
Yeah, she's getting emails on it and so forth, right? Especially because it's written right at the beginning of COVID. So the timing was right. And there were some things in my career, Sam's career, where the timing is right. You know, I got an online learning and blended learning early on in the time. So for you, this was a way to wedge in, to get your foot in the door to many people reading about you and they're familiar with you. You'll meet people after COVID who's read these pieces at conference. Believe me, they'll say, oh, I know who you are. So what I want to ask is, what were you wrong about? No, what were you correct about? What kinds of things? So you said, you know, you talked about 5 things that university with distance and open ed, there are some advantages. COVID enabled us to try these things out, and people discovered these advantages of open and online and distance forms of learning. And maybe you could repeat what some of those are, because not everybody read those. I read them this afternoon. I've read them before. I've read these a couple of times. But what were some new things that you didn't write about that were unexpected positives and maybe a negative or two?
It's funny that I have just asked by the editor to write follow-up piece.
Can I publish it with you, please, so I can have 200,000 people read my articles?
No,
You and Sam and I are going to be second and third authors, okay? You know.
I'll love to have you guys on. I think, all right, to answer the question, what I learned over the pandemic is that how dangerous it is to make any narrative, just a single narrative about what it is. Because as you all agree that I think diversity is the term that I'll probably capture in terms of what have happened during the pandemic. So it's just amazing that how different everyone is within their little classroom. The pandemic was the same, but so it's almost like amazing to see how creative individual teachers are in a way that they're on, you know, whether we agree with them or not, it's not really a secondary issue, but like everyone, except for a small number of people still, let's say that like kind of would only try that much, but a lot of teachers have tried so much more than we expect them that to do. And when I wrote the first piece, for example, I said that it's going to be very easy for university to move online because instructors are not ready. I was pretty much worried about instructors who would not be able to do anything about the situation. But it's amazing after a month, like a semester or two. I mean, whether they did it all right or not, you know, all of them were able to do something with this technology, and things have moved. And then our students, of course, there are quality issues that we can, you know, have different conversation, but at least people were connected one way or the other way to institutions and be able to pursue their study. So that's something that I don't know, personally, I have learned, and that was humble experience for me to be able to see that, interact with the instructors from departments, which I've never really interacted with before. And then I learned people were like quite clever. We are all clever teachers in their own way. They have done all sorts of things. So that's why those 5 ways, I have written those, but I feel a bit shy about it because it's really, what I see now is that I can't really even write anything in general kind of commentary upon what have happened. It's just, I don't know, I'm not really sure. It's just, I feel like I'm so tiny to understand the complexity of everyone's experience. So writing the short piece, like 800 words, like, and giving tips to people, I don't know. That's what I learned personally through this experience is I think people are so much better than sometimes we kind of expect them to be. Resilience is certainly there. So I became so much more positive about individual teachers' capacity and then their love for their students. Everyone, basically everyone wants to be a good teacher. So I'm not really answering your question, Kurt, systematically because I don't have answers. It's kind of difficult to write about, but I think diversity and resilience, I think that those 2 are the key terms that I observed and which has to be added to, you know, my earlier pieces, which I didn't capture those aspects, didn't expect. So I'm trying to push. I mean, Som, you have helped me to write reflection. I mean, that paper is doing really well. I got a lot of good feedback from readers. Thank you so much at the distance education. So I'm trying to really provide bit more positive narrative narratives about what have happened, what people have done. I really try to, I think my job is to acknowledge people try really hard. And no matter what, it's not my position to evaluate what have people's do and kind of, say that you have done it well or not. But going back to this last sentence is going back to my BZ paper. That's what I've tried to do. I just feel sad about some of the missed opportunities. If we have done more proactively, we could have changed actually educational paradigms so much more radically. The opportunities were there, but now I see that a lot of teachers going back to face-to-face without having much, in a change. So it's a little bit sad, but I mean, that's all what we could do throughout that experience. I mean, difficult experience that we had.
That's what we're saying is silver lining for learning. We're also bringing that up, but maybe you need to write the article. Maybe there aren't 14 simple tips. I've come to realize there aren't 14 simple tips. You could have another 3 articles read by 200,000 people that would be in tune with your philosophy today, with your qualms of. In effect, what you're saying is you would never have published these had your thinking today. It would have stopped you from writing these. It's a good thing you wrote them to get to this point of reflection about yourself as an instructor, as an academic. Your journey. This is part of your journey. But now maybe you need to write the other piece. I'll give Sam the last comment, and then we'll have to say goodbye. And my students, can you hang around with me for 1 or 2 minutes, just so we can set up for next week. So Sam, you get the last comment for tonight.
It put me on the spot there. I really don't know what to say, but to encourage you. I mean, I see you guys, 30 years ago, myself being in that position. It's a very exciting time to be a graduate student, and especially in this field of, if I can use the broadest term, educational instructional technology. Students of the field would understand where we came from, how the term educational technology, learning design, or more correctly, learning experience design, and a bunch of things related to it, has come from the 1960s, over 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I think the field is maturing a lot more, has matured a lot more. And I think, who would have thought that COVID-19 would just flip the cart so much in our favor? So many of us, of our generation, have spent so much time trying to educate people about educational technology, about learning, and about teaching, and about open learning, and those sorts of things. But nothing could have helped us more than COVID. So I think you are at the tip of the surf. You're at the cusp of change. So it's a very exciting time for you guys. The world is your oyster. There's so much promise and opportunity ahead of you. There's so many things that I could say that you might like to do, but I think Kurt is going to give me that opportunity some other time. So I'll talk about that. But for now, bravo, move on, hang in there is all I can say.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you for Kyungmee for coming in tonight. It's been great to have you. I promised an hour. It's been an hour and a half with you. So thanks to your mom cleaning there and back in Seoul and all. And I will set everyone up for next time when we have Okwa Lee from Korea come in. Her final day as a professor. She's retiring at the end of that session. I don't know if you know Okwa Lee Samnadu. She's an old friend from grad school, and we have a couple others coming in. You probably know her, Mi-hun Lee from Korea as well, and Tom Reynolds, who wrote my two MOOCs books with me. And so it will be a great. And then one other person 4 people from my grad school. We'll have a panel about the past, present, and future. So we'll talk about 30 years ago, today, and maybe 30 years from now. So that'll be kind of fun. Maybe I'll get Sam to come in to be the moderator. We'll see if I can talk him into that. We'll talk. I'll talk on email to Sam, and maybe Kyungmee, you can come back too. So thanks again. I'll give you a round of applause. And
thank you so much for that. It was great to see you all. Good luck. Bye.
I will stop the recording at this point, and we'll go to the cloud, and I'll make a